she had a bunch of brothers and a couple of sisters. And that's kind of where my whole memory starts. And my father used to tell me about how he would go out in the dirt roads and get sticks and draw cars and inspect the tire treads from the cars that they made in the dirt. And that's how he became, because it was wagons in those days mostly. And so he would spend hours, because they didn't have computers or anything for kids to play with, drawing in the dirt. And that was entertainment. And it was farm people. My grandpa owned the store in Boston, Arkansas, which was an old country store where they had bags of this and bags of that. And, you know, I still have a lot of pictures of that stuff, or a reasonable amount of those days in him. And they lived up there for many years, and then he had the store down the mountain, Boston Mountain in Arkansas. And it was a larger store in Pettigrew, Arkansas. But my grandfather loved to play baseball, and he was a big man, and he was a cool guy. My dad told me, I never met him. But they would throw rocks, big rocks in practice, or pitching and things like that, and he was a pitcher. And one day a hog crawled under his store. They didn't have regular foundations. They had rocks and then sticks that held the store up. I've got pictures of the store too. But a big hog got under the store, and he was so big that they couldn't coax him out because he was big enough to touch the rafters. This is my dad telling me this story. And so my grandpa was a really good baseball pitcher. And so he finally got a rock, and he hit the thing a couple times trying to get it out from under the store. And then he threw it one time, and it hit the hog between the eyes and killed it while it was still under the store. This is like this 500-pound hog, a giant hog. So they ended up winching him out. But that's the life he lived. That was the entertainment they had. They played in the dirt, and they played outside, and they never went inside. They had no computer, no nothing, no TVs, probably no radios. I mean, maybe they had a radio. But Dad grew up there and they moved down the hill as they got older, and that's where Dad met my mother. And my mother was the youngest daughter, I believe the youngest, maybe Bobby Lou was. And her parents owned this white house, which looked very large to me as a kid when we went back there in World War II to stay with him while Dad was in the service. And my life every day was taken up by an uncle or an aunt. And they would take me to work with them, or they'd take me to one of the farms they had. If you pull into Stillwell, Oklahoma right now, on the road, it's in the mountains on the eastern side of Oklahoma by Fort Smith, Arkansas, you will see this huge building, and it will have on the building painted, it says Carson Farms, and because they're the biggest business in eastern Oklahoma. I mean, they owned what became Mrs. Smith's pies, frozen pies. They had the largest cold storage in the United States of America during World War II, so they canned and grew for World War II. And my uncle also was an investment banker and owned savings and loans and banks. He owned over 300 banks. And so they were all nice to me. They were my mother's brothers, and my grandmother, her mother, and her father were still alive during that time. He was a big man with giant shoes and wore black suits. And they did not like my father because my father brought my mother to California. And none of them were ever supposed to leave. They were supposed to grow up in Stillwell, Oklahoma. They were supposed to, as Dad got into the family and married my mom, they had a place for him in one of the banks that he would work in the bank and work his way up to be the runner of a bank, I guess, or something like that. But Dad was kind of stubborn and wanted to come to the car world where the cars cars were and the hot rods and this and that and the other. And so he went to work for Hot Rod Magazine, Motor Trend, Peterson Publishing, and I lived in Oklahoma that whole time, and I loved it, but I didn't know what I was doing because I was a young kid. But anyway, when he came back from the war, he immediately came to Stillwell, Oklahoma, and picked me and my mom up. And off we went. And we never went back. That's where my mother's sickness showed up really dramatically, probably because she missed her family. And hey, I'm going to cough.
Yeah.
I'm losing my voice. But
yeah. Take your time.
She took, and she got sicker and sicker and sicker. And so my dad had his mother come to San Fernando, California, where we lived. He worked for Lockheed, and then did the drawings in Hot Rod Magazine and Motor Trend and Road and Track, because they were all just starting, those magazines. And so he would do the cutaway drawings and other projects for other magazines. And he worked at Douglas Aircraft, which was the DC-9 and all that stuff. But they all built fighter planes. And he was a designer, and he was really huge, and he ran an art department and a design department, and they designed the C-130 in the old days. And so when my mother got sicker and sicker and sicker, he had called my grandmother out to come out, and she's the one with the wooden leg. And so she loved us, but they had Jan by then too in L.A.
The one with the
my sister.
Who's the one with the wooden leg?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother?
His mother. My father's mother. Her name was Grace, and she was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman. And when she was a young girl, a bunch of girls were running through the fields of Arkansas, and they climbed a chain link fence. And when she got to the top, she lost her balance, and it tore her knee and her leg when she fell, because the top of a chain link fence is those points sticking up. They're woven. And she got gangrene, and they had to take her leg off. And so that's why she had a wooden leg. She got her wooden leg when she was in her teens, still late teens. And so she came to live with us. She owned a thrift store in Mena, Arkansas. Mena, Arkansas is where the movie about Tom Cruise carrying the illegal weapons and cash for the government when they were fighting Noriega in Panama. Yeah. If you've ever seen that movie, it's called, I forgot what it's called. He flies an airplane. That's a true story.
Yeah.
And Mena Airport, if you go to Mena Airport in the mountains of Arkansas, you will find all these hangars out in the middle of nowhere, basically, where they used to have black C-130s coming in. What would happen was our government would fly guns to Noriega when they were in that war, the Panama War, and our government would give him guns, and he would give us drugs to bring back to put on the streets of Chicago and stuff like that. That we were the largest. The American government was the largest drug dealer in the world. And we at Ferrari had the third largest drug dealer in the world as a customer. And he got killed in Los Gatos in a gunfight with his partner one night. So the story goes, down by the high school. Anyway, his name was Bear. He looked like a professor. And he was a good friend of my partner's, Richard.
How did you?
And he was good friends only through school. They'd grown up together, and they both. And so a lot of the stuff you hear on the news, and, I don't know if you ever read up on the war in Panama when we got involved in that. We were giving them arms. Well, we were being paid, and the drugs were getting put on the streets to but they were used as a the thing that helped keep the neighborhoods calmer, the drugs and things. They were brought in by us. So, and there were a lot of private drug dealers too. Anyway, I'm jumping around, but it seems like I almost have to jump around to tell a story if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
It's like, so I've been to that airport because I used to live in Mena, Arkansas sometimes, but I had no idea what was happening because I was very young and, you know, stuff like that. But now if you go to the Mena airport, it is in the middle of nowhere, there's an industry there that takes care of planes, restores old planes, has got everything like that. It's almost amazing. And in that movie with Tom Cruise, it shows that he was there, and it shows pretty much what's going on there today. But he was doing, anyway. You got to watch the movie. It's great. It's called American Made.
American Made, yeah.
And it's really good.
It, yeah.
And Mena, one of my uncles, one of Dad's brothers, was pretty well. He owned this enormous pulpwood yard where they cut trees for paper. And he had a monstrous business, and he would cut timber all over the South, wherever he could buy a stand of timber, ship it to the paper companies, and that's how they make paper from the pulpwood of pine trees. Mm-hmm. And they were really rich, and they lived in this big, beautiful brick house on the park in the middle of town, or across the street from the park. And I would visit there and stay there a lot, and all my uncles were from Oklahoma or Arkansas. So I was there a lot of summers, and I think a lot of it I'd spend all summer with them, but to give my dad a break from the things he had gone through with my mother, you know, or was going through with my mother. And sometimes he would send her with me and her, because she was theirs, and they took care of her really well. They never wanted her to leave, as I said already. Mm-hmm. They did not want her going to California because they knew the problems she had. And Dad probably found out as he went along too, but it took time, and she got worse and worse and worse. So finally, we end up back in California, and or I do, full time. I mean, not visiting so much my uncles and aunts. And she was getting worse and worse, and finally, one night, a doctor in a 47 Pontiac Fastback, I remember it, I was a little kid, and a nurse came with him that was dressed in the 1940s nurses' little caps, and they took her away. And they took her to Camarillo State Hospital in Southern California, down just before you come over the Grapevine. It used to be there, of course, it's not anymore, because all those hospitals are now gone, those state hospitals. Agnew was one here. And she never came home. And they had her in there, and my dad went over time when he finally realized she was not ever going to be able to come back, because they did a lobotomy on her. And she was one of the first people to have a lobotomy, where they cut the thing between your sides of your brain. So you could never get well, but you aren't as excitable and out of control as you were. It calms you down.
Yeah.
So they had Jan by then, my sister, and she was like 1 or 2, 3 years old. I don't know, she was younger than 3. And so when they took my mother away, this is before he got my grandmother to come. At night, I don't know if he was drinking or not. I don't think he ever really drank, but he would beat the walls at night and cry and just wouldn't go to work, didn't go to work anymore or anything. Just me and Jan. I was taking care of Jan, basically. I was 5 years older. And finally, the neighbors there's so much to this. It's like, when he went to World War II, he was one of the last to go to World War II, meaning he was one of the last in the group that went. He was on a seaplane tender in the Pacific. We were fighting the Japanese. And that's when I was back in Oklahoma with me, but I didn't have a sister yet. Jan was born after he came back from World War II. And Jan was one or two, maybe not even one, when the people came and took my mom away. Okay. And Dad, I was 5 years old, but I was kind of taking care of her. I mean, because Dad at night would just cry and go in his bedroom and beat the walls. He'd beat the walls at night with his fists. And so finally the neighbors, people were super close when World War II ended. If you were in a neighborhood, all the men had gone, most of them, to fight. And all the ladies and stuff stayed home and worked and somehow survived. I don't know how. But the men were gone. The kids, and then finally when the war ended, they all came home. And it was like the most unbelievable, I mean, the whole neighborhoods, we always had block parties and cook, and the whole street of Aztec Street in San Fernando, and any other street you wanted to talk about, everybody was really close. There was no television yet. TV had not come out yet to the public. So Jan was born, Dad is there, I'm there in that house, cute little house. He paid cash for it. I remember counting out the money on the table for the house after the war. You get a GI, whatever, and this and that and the other. So when they took my mother away, he called his mother and had her come to take care of me, Jan. He went crazy for a long time, for maybe months, weeks, I don't know. But finally the neighbors called the authorities and said, and they loved my dad. Everybody loved each other in those days. And the authorities came and they said to him, unless you straighten up immediately, meaning take care of me and my sister, because he wasn't. We were taking care of ourselves. The whole house looked like, the kids would keep a house that were 5 and 1. And we were feeding ourselves and everything. I mean, I was taking care of my sister the best I could. He was gone mentally. The authorities came out, I remember, took him into the kitchen table and said, if you do not straighten up, this county will be taking your children. They were coming to get me and Jan.
Yeah. So can I go? That fan keeps going on.
Oh.
I'm worried that it's going to upset.
Just go here. I'll do it. It's easier.
I'll do it.
It's easy for me. But the thing is, Jan and I were walking around like in rags, and I mean, our clothes probably weren't washed, and he was completely gone. But those people came that night, I remember, and they took him in the kitchen, and they set him down, and I was in the living room listening, and they said, if you are not straightened up, like by tomorrow the next day, we are coming to get your children. We are putting them in state care, health care, whatever they take kids that the parents are messed up. He got up the next morning. By the time I woke up, he was shaved, dressed, shirt and tie on, and was flawless from that moment. When he got threatened of them taking us. He called my grandmother.
This is Rex.
Yeah, Rex.
Yeah.
Called my grandmother, and she was on a plane and was there in a couple days. And she had a thrift store in Arkansas, in Mena, where the funny planes was going on. Mm-hmm. She sold used clothing and like the Happy Dragon, let's say, okay? And she was a Seventh-day Adventist. So all the old people and all the people in these small towns, and even today, all the people go shopping on Saturday. Mm. She was closed because they go to church on Saturday. That's their Sunday. So her business was also failing, and her kids were just keeping her in business to keep her happy.
Yeah. So
they closed the store. She came out here, and she was a wonderful, 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 like most grandmas are, And she jumped right in, and she loved having 2 little kids again. And everybody in the neighborhood, we had real neighborhoods in those days where people knew each other. Mm-hmm. It's not like today. It's like you knew everyone on the block. Yeah. And everyone on the block, every woman on the block, it was their duty to watch every kid on the block. Mm-hmm. They took care of each other. They had just been through this war, and And kids weren't sissies like they are today. We fought each other all the time. We'd beat each other up, and then an hour later we're friends.
Mm-hmm.
We just did that because there wasn't anything else to do except wail on each other and play.
Yeah.
Play cowboys and Indians and all that. So I would hang out with this kid that was older than me named Richard. And my sister was small, but our house suddenly again was perfect, flawless. I mean, you could tell humans lived there again because it was a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, we had 12 orange trees in the backyard, and she, even being from Arkansas, an old Arkansas lady, went and bought some chickens, and they ran around the backyard, and she'd kill one for dinner and dress it and all that. I mean, it was make me a pie every day. I was in heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't have to take care of my sister anymore, like
right.
a father. I wasn't quite old enough, didn't know about that stuff that much. So we would play in the neighborhood, and we would build soapbox racers, and there was a little slope. The neighborhood's still there. And the parents, the mothers of all these children, well, my grandma was a lot older than them, but they all loved her. And she'd make them pies, and they would, all this stuff. And I suddenly, I think in 48 or maybe 49, televisions came out. And my dad went and bought a brand new Hoffman big cabinet, like a cabinet like half the width of that, or a little more than half the width, actually half the width of both sides. Well, no. Anyway, I'm off on another. It was blonde, and it was big, though. The TV was a big cabinet, like twice the size, or not twice, maybe as big as that thing right there. And the screen was this big, because that was the technology.
Yeah.
And then you'd always have to, have a thing to bump it from behind, because it would start flipping and all that stuff. But we were watching kids' programs and stuff like that. And everybody came to our house in at night to watch Ed Sullivan, one of the first shows on TV, because none of them had TVs yet, So people were different then. People loved each other. They cared about each other. Mm-hmm. You knew everyone. So then we moved to Georgia. Dad gets in. Charlotte was really probably I think she was the highest paid woman at Lockheed. And we could go anywhere we wanted, so we figured LA was getting bad, so we left.
What did she do at Lockheed?
Answered only to the president. I don't know what she did, but she did the yearly reports for all the Lockheeds. And she did all the artwork for the reports. And who knows what else. She was a big, tall, very pretty woman for those days. I mean, she was very, very good looking. She was a big UCLA gal. She still was, till the day she died, would go every 2 years to the sorority meetings, no matter where we were. And I didn't get along with her very well, but she was very intelligent, very smart. And she brought 2 kids with her, Harv and Madeline. But we moved to Georgia. And 8 years there, I loved that place more than any place I'd ever been. I was in 5th grade when we moved there. We were Yankees. They thought we were Yankees because we weren't from there. And that is a whole nother story, that life in that place. But then we moved back here, and we bought the house on Surrey Lane in Saratoga. Brand new, big house. 1.5 acres, all that stuff. I mean, it was 1.5 acres in Saratoga off Pierce Road, which is a neighborhood where that was expensive. $31,000. $31,000. I mean, that's ridiculous when you talk about it today. And I was 17, and I spent my last half year at Los Gatos High School. I had a real heavy Georgia accent because Charlotte said that I was susceptible to my environment. And I guess that meant I was easily swayed by anything that was put in front of me. But I loved going to Los Gatos High. It was incredible. It was unbelievable. And the kids were so nice and everything. So I don't know what started me. The library was in the old location, which is now some kind of a center, across the street from the current library, up the street, back toward Ferrari.
Right.
But after school, I would find old cars and I would buy them, and I would drive up to the library about 3 o'clock after school, and I would just go sit in there, and it became my office for buying and selling cars that I would find by going over the hill to Santa Cruz to the old neighborhoods. And there were tons of old people in those neighborhoods. I mean, tons. And they had old cars they hadn't driven for years. They didn't sell them. They would just park them in the garage and leave them. Well, I started figuring out that if I went early enough, like I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would go over there and get there by 6, and I would start driving the old neighborhoods, okay? And that's when the old people got up that were retired and would come out in the yard and work in the yard till it got too hot or till it was nap time or something. They would have their garage doors open, and I would see an old car in the garage. And I would tell it had been sitting there a long time. So I would stop the car, and I'd be with a friend always because they like to come. And I'd go up and say, "Hi, my name's Brian. I'm so-and-so. And I go to San Jose State, and I need a car to drive because, I need to have mine mold and broke." And
you were in high school at the time.
No, well, I was in high school when I was selling cars out of the library. Yes, I was in high.
You told them you were in.
That was in my last year of high school too. Yeah, and then I didn't go to college, so I would just make up the story I was going to
make it up.
And that I would be a student looking for help to get a car.
Yeah, okay.
And so I had this story, and I was really nice to them, and they were really nice to me. But they go, "Well, I got that old Chevrolet up there. We don't drive anymore. I've been having it for years." And a lot of those people were in Santa Cruz. I mean, it was a different time. It wasn't like it is today. Today is, anyway, they'd go, "Well, I don't want to sell you something that you might have trouble with. I don't want you having trouble and something like that costing you money." And I said, "Well, my brother's a mechanic. He can help me with anything." So we come back and make a deal. I buy this old car in the garage. It hadn't been run for years. And then one day, I'm going through this. We would go down the alleys. There were lots of alleys because when houses were built in the old days, they put the garage in an alley. That's how you went in your garage. They didn't come off the street.
Yeah.
And we would go down the driveways in the old part. When you go over to Santa Cruz, when you go right toward Half Moon Bay and off to the right upward, that old part of Santa Cruz, there were just tons of houses with these old garages and stuff. And so there were alleys. So we would go down the alleys and we'd take a flashlight with us because a lot of the doors were these open this way doors. On the garages didn't have doors that went up like that.
Yeah.
They had barn doors.
Yeah.
And you'd open both doors and then you could back out.
Yeah,
so I would look, there's always a crack in the middle where you could look into the garages, even if they were closed. And you'd wait till your eyes adjusted, because it took a minute, because it's dark in the garage, right? And you'd see the outline of the car, if there was one in there, and you could see what it was. And so then you'd walk around front and knock on the door. Anyway, so one time, I can't remember what it was, so I stopped the car, get out, and it was even, the alley was even still dirt, 2 ruts. That's, Santa Cruz is an old town. And I see this outline of this car, and it's old, and it's really old. It's a 32 Auburn Phaeton. And that, to me, was like, oh. So I walk around the front, and I knock on the door, and this old Japanese man comes to the door. And he's really nice, and he's short, and he used to be a gardener. We guys, let's become friends with him. I'd go in the house, and they'd give me a Coca-Cola or some water, and sit and talk to them. They were lonely, they were retired, older, and they were honestly older, nice, lonely people. And they thought I was a nice young man, which I was. And he finally, I said, "I'd really like to see that old car in your garage." And he says, "Well, I'm really embarrassed to show it to you." He says, in the early 50s, I painted it with a brush. And he says, I'm really embarrassed by the paint job I did. Well, the early 50s would have been right after World War II stopped, and he's Japanese. And they got really some bad mistreatment, the Japanese that lived here. They got sent to camps by us. In fact, I'm trying to figure out which wife's which. Anyway, your step-grandfather, Tina's dad, was shipped to Utah to the internment camp to take care of the Japanese that they were storing up in the internment camps. Okay? He was a doctor. They sent him to take care, to be the doctor for their prisoners that were Americans living here that owned ranches next to them. They were Dr. Sanfilippo's neighbors in internment camps, and he's taking care of them. And they're damn lucky he was, because he loved them all, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's history in this family you don't even understand. It's like, I mean, Dr. Sanfilippo was one of the kindest men on earth, and one of the richest. But anyway, so this Japanese man is really embarrassed about this. I said, I don't care. I'd really like to see it and all this. And I went back there. And so it's this big 4-door Auburn convertible. If you look it up on the phone, it'll blow your mind. It's a 32 Auburn Phantom. Anyway, I make a deal with him. I pay $350 for it. And it's worth, 1932 Auburn Phantom. So I was also drawing unemployment because I had worked at Lockheed and stuff like that. So I had this big dog named Mofig, and we were living up on Highland Avenue, is across the street from the high school. You know where 7-Eleven is? Mm-hmm. Well, if you go up toward that part of town, you turn right by the 7-Eleven. Yeah. And the road winds up the hill. Yeah. Well, Craig Burgess, who I'd gone to high school with, was a real smart guy, kind of a nerd, but he and I rented a house to live in together because we couldn't afford to rent by ourselves. So it was this old neat house with a big outside porch that went around the outside of the house, and he was a vet student at San Jose State. And he was really into cats, dogs, anything alive that was wild or not wild or not. He had greyhounds. I had this dog named Mofig that was a 120-pound cross between a bull mastiff and a pit bull. But just the nicest dog you ever seen. And he'd ride around in my old cars with me all the time. He'd sit in the back seat and just be happy there. Mm-hmm. So I buy this Auburn Fade and get it running, and I'm going downtown to collect my unemployment in it, and the top's down, and Mofig's in the back. And it was the people would come out from the unemployment office and go, they just couldn't believe it, driving this thing with this dog going and getting your unemployment. But I kept that thing for quite a while. Anyway, the library was my office, and I started finding a lot of older cars, and a lot of kids came and started going driving and knew I had old cars to sell. So I had a really good business going, just selling to the kids, and I kept doing it, and then I met Susan. Do you want this kind of stuff where I met Susan?
I want it.
I had a friend named Bob Palmer, whose father also worked for Lockheed and knew my parents really well. They were good friends. And they had moved here first to come work for Lockheed here. Mm-hmm. They lived in Georgia, and I knew them there as a teenager. And they used to we used to have on our property in Georgia, we had 17 acres. We had a baseball field, a diamond out on the property. We had horseshoe courts. We had a lake where you swam. We had horseshoe courts. We had all sorts of horizontal bar stuff because I really did a lot of that in high school. I was really good on the horizontal bar. Mm-hmm. I played football, and I threw the shot at track. I placed third in state of Georgia in track, throwing the shot. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty sporty. I was in really good shape. Mm-hmm. I was like ridiculous good shape because our coach was a man named Coach Yost, who insisted on being in flawless condition. He made, and we were a real small school, high school, really small. And we had to play all the big Atlanta schools because we were 8 or 9 miles away from there. And they had hundreds of guys on the football team. And we'd have to go play them, and they'd just kick our ass because we had to play the whole game. There wasn't any me go, okay, offense go in. You played offense and defense because there were only 14 kids on the team. So we'd go get our ass kicked to the point of unbelief. I mean, because they could just keep running people in all this. And we always knew it was going to happen. So David Sullivan always used to bring 4 quarts of moonshine to the game while we were changing. We could get half drunk and so that we could take our beating. And we were all in great shape. One-on-one, we kicked shit out of any of those schools. But, I mean, meaning fighting or something. But it was pretty rough school, high school. But we just knew we were going to get our ass kicked. And so we were half in the bag. So I got this girlfriend my junior and senior year who this real rich kid had been going with. He was a nice kid. And she was 5 feet tall and a cheerleader at Sandy Springs High School. Her dad was head chemist at Coca-Cola. And she had a real pretty older sister. And she had a grandpa that still lived with them who was the neatest old man you ever met. They lived in this gorgeous colonial house in Buckhead, Georgia, which was the real rich part of Atlanta. And I don't even remember how I met her. I think I met her at the Varsity Drive-In, and we just clicked. And, I mean, she was cute, 5 feet tall, and a cheerleader at Sandy Springs. So...
How old were you? You were in
12th grade.
You were in 12th grade.
But we played them the first game every year. So when she became my girlfriend, she's a cheerleader at the school we're playing. And, everybody knew everybody and stuff. And
12th grade, you went to Los Gatos High, though.
My last half of my 12th grade.
Oh, you moved back to that's right.
We moved here halfway in December.
Yeah.
So... And I almost didn't come. This close I didn't come. But anyway, Kathy was really an neat little girl, and she's one of the favorite humans of my life. But she would be, when we'd play them, I'm playing football against her team, and she's a cheerleader. So I would always go, there was always a dance after the game. Mm-hmm. So I would have to also then go to her dance.
Okay.
After just getting the holy living bejesus kicked out of us. Anyway, that didn't work out, so she didn't come, and I was always going to go back and get her, and blah, 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 and she just died a couple of years ago. And I got the thing from somebody that she had passed away and just killed me for months. I really loved her, and I think she felt the same way. But anyway, when we came, I don't know where I was, but when we came here, I was going to high school here. I made that quite a little business, buying and selling cars to high school kids. And also I ran ads in the San Jose Mercury, which in those days people advertised cars in the newspaper. There was a classified. And people would call me up and come out and buy some of the cars. And so I lived in that house. Bob Palmer from Georgia, who was a year older than me, they had moved here first, and he became my good friend to hang out with for a while. So we would go to the John's Drive-In downtown in San Jose on the weekends. That was our entertainment. And everybody from everywhere would go hang out there that liked cars. And there were a lot of Mexican kids, and it was a different group, And I finally met Susan. She was working at A&W down by Lark Avenue. Mm-hmm. She was a car hop. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Poole owned the restaurant. So I wasn't working there yet. I'd never been in there. But my friend Bob Palmer and I owned a 37 Ford Coupe. A 48 Ford convertible, primered. And Bob's with me one day, and we pull into the A&W, and they had car hops that walked out and hung the tray on your window and stuff. So she's on duty that day, and we're just giving her a bunch of shit. And she's real religious and real tight-jawed, meaning she didn't do anything wrong. Susan, my first wife, you know her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
She's my
she was
grandma.
just, and we're just giving her shit. I mean, just playing with her and all that. And she was real religious.
She wasn't having it.
Huh?
She wasn't having it, or
Oh no, she thought we were the worst boys that ever lived, and so you guys are just mean, and we were just kidding her, like kids did in those days. And she brought out whatever we had. And she says, "I'm glad you're leaving," and and so we left, and Bob, a few weeks later, I had a '37 Ford too that had a Cadillac engine, and it was pretty cool, '37 Ford Coupe. So I'm by myself this day, and I pull in because I wanted to see her again. I thought she was kind of cute in those days, and so I pull in, and I was, I guess, for having a little bit of Georgia in me, a little bit of Illinois in me. I'd been on that side too. Illinois was like a different country than Georgia. I mean, the kids were different, totally different. They weren't even close to the same. I mean, I went there from Georgia, had that accent. First day I'm there's a big orphanage in Illinois where a lot of kids were, and it's still there. You look up the orphanage in San Jose, Champaign-Urbana, there's tons of kids that no parents or nothing. And in those days, the little orphan boys wore these black leather jackets and engineer's boots, the old motorcycle gang look. And there were a bunch of them there that went to the orphanage. Mm-hmm. And all the kids from the orphanage came to the regular high school. Mm-hmm. So I'm there, and this really cute girl, they're kind of picking on me because I was in sixth grade, seventh grade. So I'm the new kid in school, and it's colder than hell in the winter there. I mean, it is freezing. Georgia wasn't like that. Georgia was more like this. So I'm going to school, and this kid wearing a black leather jacket, he chooses me out because I'm the new kid. He's going to impress Matilda, his girlfriend, cute little girl named Matilda. And he comes up to me and he goes, he knew I was from Georgia. His teacher introduced me and all that stuff. And he comes to me and he says, "Let me get a hold on you." I said, "What?" He said, "Let me get a hold on you. See if you can get out of it." Well, people used to watch wrestling all the time on TV. So he wanted to get me in a hold to see if I could get out of it. He's a little shorter than me. And so he gets me in a full Nelson. I said, "Okay." So he gets me in this full Nelson thing from behind. And I just flip him over my body and put his butt on the ground because I really could fight. I was a really good fighter, wrestler. We didn't use knives on each other in those days. But his girlfriend got all upset, and all his kids were around. It was recess. And I just shoved it off and started walking around. He said, "Wait a minute. I messed up. Let me see if I can do that. Let's do that again." He didn't have a Georgia accent. I'm just making that up. Yeah. But he did it again, and I just flipped him over my thing. And I used to fight all the time. I mean, in California and Georgia, you fought every day. You just did. You just fought. You beat the shit out of each other. But you'd never kill anybody. You just wasn't the same. So I flipped him off again, and I held him down that time by his shoulders, and I said, "Okay, let's stop, okay?" I mean, I was a nice kid. And his girlfriend is hitting me in the back with her purse, saying, let him up, and all that girl. Once again, she didn't have a Georgia accent. So I let him up, and I said, "Let's stop. Let's don't do this anymore. I don't know anybody here, And so he sulked off to his side of the corner. But from that time on, I had a really nice time up there. But when you'd go on a date there, the mothers, it was a different class and a different sort of people from Illinois to Georgia. Champaign-Urbana is also where the University of Illinois is. So there were a lot of professors and that kind of families there. And the movie theater was an arts movie theater. They were showing foreign films and stuff like that. And so Dad and Charlotte loved that. They'd take us to the Illini Theater, which was college supported too. So we stayed there 2 years. and I had a couple little girlfriends there. But when you had a date, you didn't go on dates. Moms would arrange little dinner parties at their houses, and their daughters and the little girlfriends could invite a boy, and then they'd come feed you. But you would always dress for dinner. You had a tie, and they had little card tables they would put out, and you would sit down and have a dinner with another couple. And I got pictures of that too, me sitting there with these little girls and with my tie on. And I had a Jewish friend who was really Jewish. His name was Phil Yenowin. And I always seemed to get along with Jewish guys. I don't know why. Just I always liked them, and they were smart, and they were usually very nice, good people. And they would be good friends to you. They were not friends that would jump on different sides, you know. They
Like
stuck
one of your
with you if
ex-husband
they liked
was.
you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were always your buddy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then we moved back to Georgia. We leased our house out to some people we never met. We left, then a realtor found a client. We never met them. We never went back to Georgia. We just stayed in Illinois, and we worked, and we had a real modern house, real contemporary, and they were making lots of money. Are you tired? Are you done with this?
No, my neck.
I'm
just
saying-
looking at you this way. I'm not tired at all.
But
This is Rex and Charlotte,
Rex and Charlotte,
and were they both working at Lockheed at
yes.
this point?
Well, they had worked at Lockheed in Georgia.
Yeah.
She was once again very high up. Dad was pretty damn high up.
Did
too.
they meet at Lockheed?
Hmm?
Did they meet at Lockheed?
They met at Douglas,
At
in
Douglas.
L.A. After they took my mom, and they may have known each other before, but they started, after Dad went through all his bullshit, they started dating.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlotte had Harvard and Madeline.
Yeah.
And they were like 4 or 3 and 5 or something like that. And they dated for quite a while because my grandmother was taking care, and she was living with Dad and Jan and me, and she was pretty tough old Okie broad.
Yeah.
She didn't understand this, being married and then all of a sudden having a girlfriend and shit like that, especially one like Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
So when Dad finally introduced her to Charlotte, and then she found out 2 more kids came with Charlotte, it was quite a little, I don't know how you would call it. It was like they instantly hated each other.
Sure.
I mean, hated each other. Charlotte was trying to find her way into a new life.
Mm.
Grandma doesn't want to end her life with people in it. She had been alone for years. Even though her kids were around, she now had a home again and could cook and make cakes and all that, and she loved it.
Yeah.
So when I meet them, finally, Charlotte and Dad had been going out for quite a while, but before they finally introduced me to those 2 kids and Grandma to Charlotte. Charlotte had a house in another neighborhood, and Dad had the house in San Fernando. So I had my tonsils out, and my recovery, I went to Charlotte's house and slept there till your tonsils got better. I had to stay in bed for a couple days. Anyway, well, Charlotte's ex-husband was a big 6'5" guy named Howard. And constantly, when Dad and Charlotte talked, I could just pick up, they really made him sound like a monster. Charlotte's ex-husband. And he was an engineer, and he was a pilot. He had his own little air coupe plane. And in the backyard at Charlotte's house, where he had lived with Charlotte and Harvard and Madeline, there were 2 link trainers in the garage. You know what a link trainer is? A link trainer is a small thing on an electric motor on a stand with 2 little wings sticking out and a little tail on the back. And it looks like a little baby midget airplane, but 2 people can get in the cockpit of it, and all the gauges are there that required to fly a plane. It's a trainer.
Yeah.
It's called a link trainer. So you get in and you pull this hood over you, and it's pitch black. And you turn on the thing, and then all the gauges light up, and all the tiltometers or whatever the fuck they call them, and it'll turn around in circles like this, like movement, and then it will go up and down like this and like this and like this. And there's a stick where you steer.
What year was this?
Huh?
What year was this?
40s, in the 40s, how they taught pilots to fly.
Wow.
And so we would sit in there, Harvard me, in the dark, and we would fly the one link trainer that worked for hours.
Yeah.
And then outside there was a Piper Cub, a whole plane that the wings were off of, and it was just sitting there as a frame, sit behind each other, and it had a stick in it and everything.
Yeah.
We'd play in those planes.
Yeah.
And finally we turned the Piper Cub upside down, and then we'd strap ourselves in upside down and have you're about ready to go to sleep.
Me?
Yeah.
No. My neck. I'm my neck.
You want a heating pad?
No, it's okay.
Well, there's one right there. Anyway, so we would share time between Charlotte's house and between I guess I missed a little point. So finally we're living on Mountain View Street in Santa Monica. We have moved and sold the house in San Fernando. Charlotte and Dad are going together. We have a real nice big house that has a big patio, and Dad and Charlotte, Grandma now knows they're dating, and so Charlotte's starting to be introduced into each other, all of us. And Dad and Charlotte are having these parties once in a while from people at work that my grandma, being a Seventh-day Adventist, thought they were like devil parties. Where they're drinking a little bit and stuff like that. No drinking at all to her. They don't drink. And she was getting very irritated by them because she just thought the devil had taken over my father. And so they sent her back. They took her to the train station, put her on a train, sent her back to Arkansas. I remember going to the train station, and she was devastated. She was devastated. Sent her back to Arkansas. So that's the last time I saw her until I went to her funeral. And I didn't make it in time. She died before I got there. Me and Susan went. And that's where I met Charles again, my cousin, in Oklahoma. The funeral was in Oklahoma. So
you went back to the A&W to see Susan.
Oh, is that where I stopped? So I go back by myself to the A&W in my 37 Ford, and it's really a cool car. And she's working again, and I pull in, and I'm by myself, not Bob Palmer this time, and she doesn't recognize it right away because it's a different car. She walks up to the thing to take my order, and she goes, "You again." I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, it's you again. I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. What are you talking about? Something wrong with you?"
You were just gaslighting her.
She says, "Well, it was you. You were with that other guy." I said, "Oh, I don't know what you mean. It's got to be my twin brother." I said, "He has some friends and stuff, but I've never been in here before." And she said, I said, "What's the matter with you?" She said, "You were in here giving me a bad time," or however they talked to I can't. And I said, "I've never been here in my life. I don't know what's the matter with you." But I thought she was pretty cute, And she says, "Well, you were..." I said, "It must be my twin brother. He looks just like me, but I don't do stuff like..." I said, "What was he driving? What kind of car was he in?" She said, "It was an old dark gray Ford convertible." I said, "That's my brother. That's my twin brother.
Yeah.
He's kind of a jerk." And she started believing me. And so I asked her out. And she was going to Camden High School, and she was dating this big football star there named John Buck, who turned out to be a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And I guess they were in a moment of broken up or something, so she went out with me. And then, because I had all the experience working at dog and suds, you know, my dad had three of them. I knew how to run a drive-in restaurant. I'd been a car hop, I'd been a cook, I'd been everything. I meet the owner of the restaurant, who's really a nice gentleman named Mr. Poole. He had a big Buick Electra, and he liked my old cars and stuff. So I started dating her a little bit, and then suddenly she's liking me better than John Buck. And I feel bad about that because I don't like to do stuff like that. And so he says, somehow it comes up, well, I used to work in one of these places, you know, the Dog and Suds, this is the A&W. He says, do you want a job? He said, how much do you know how to do? I said, I know how to mop the floor, I know how to cook, I know how to clean, I know our orders, I know how to do everything. Because I'd worked in my dad's restaurants for 5 years, you know, and worked my way up to where I could do anything anybody else could. He hires me on the spot, so now I'm working with her. I'm inside cooking. I'm the manager of A&W, plus buying and selling whole cars. And he really liked me. He was like my second dad. He was a neat man. So she's working there. And then she goes off to nursing school. I go off to working at Bob Sykes Dodge. I started at Bob Sykes Dodge. That's 1964 now. Right? Early 1964. Mr. Poole stays my friend. He's always my friend. And I have now gotten working at Bob Sykes Dodge, I became a salesman. And they gave you 25% of the profit of what cars made. And I had to wear a tie. And it was a store called the TO system. The stores worked with a system called the TO system. So as you come in, you are a salesman, but you're a liner. You are the guy that's outside, can't come inside to get a drink of water. You wait for somebody to pull up in front, and then you attack them. Not attack them, but you, hello, I'm Brian. My uncle just hired me here. Yeah. And these would be a family of 4 kids and people getting out of a car that came in to buy cars like naive people in the old days. Before the internet, before you knew anything about what you were coming in to buy. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so I was a liner, and I had the man who hired me at Bob Sykes was called a closer. And he was a more experienced, the system came from the furniture business in Los Angeles, to where you get a young green pea, which is what they called young car salesman, to start, and they would just get the people in and get a commitment to buy something out of them. Like, if I could, would you buy this car? If I could get you the deal that you want, because people just used to drive around all the dealerships and look at all the cars. That's how they found out what the differences in the cars were. Yeah. Today, they look on their phone. Yeah. So there were no computers. There was a machine called a Frieden. That was a big, giant, could calculate payments on a car for 36 months or 48 months. And it was like a machine that was a huge typewriter, and you'd punch in the numbers, and then it would chunk it, for sometimes 3 or 4 minutes before it could come up with the figure. So we called them Okie Charmers. Okie Charmers, like Oklahoma people that are dumb. Yeah. They would watch it, make up, tell them what they had to pay.
And they just believe it.
And we called them Okie, because there were a lot of Okies that moved here. Anyway, so you'd get the person on a car, walk all over the lot. Well, I got to look at some Chevrolets up the street. Well, what about this? If I could really get you a good deal, because I just moved here, me and my wife, and I got 3 little kids. You're a little young to have, well, I know I shouldn't have probably done that, but I'm living with the boss and his family, because he's my cousin or uncle or friend or brother. And I need to get going selling some cars so I can get up my own place. Yeah. And this is honestly the story he told him. And you get them in and write them up. Okay, that'd be a 3rd down on this here, and I couldn't do that. Well, what could you do? Well, I could give you 300 down. Well, the bank would have a payment chart because there's no computer.
Yeah.
And it would show you for 36 months at this interest how much the payment would be. So you would go through the payment chart with them, finally find a payment that made them happy, which was impossible to do.
Yeah.
But you'd get them to commit. I'd buy the car today if I could get this much down, this much a month, and these many months. I would buy the car right now. Here, sign here. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to need something to go up. They won't talk to me unless I got it showing you're serious. So you want to give me $100 or something? Well, I don't have $100 on me. Well, how about I got to take something? How about your watch? Well, okay, and they give you your watch and the keys to their trade-in if they had a trade-in. So up you go, upstairs to the sales office. And the sales managers were on a foot higher ramp where the desks were so they could look down at us.
On you.
Yeah. We're the salesmen. They're the liners.
Yeah.
They're the manager. They're going to help us. So, but that was our way of some kind of respect. It was a whole system. It was the furniture company in LA started. So Jack would get one of the closers. There was the manager on the mound, and there were then other guys that had better suits and better ties that would come talk to the people. So they're the one that hired me for their team. Each closer had a team of 6 or 7 salesmen that worked for him. And then he would come down when I took up the offer. And he would come back, hi, folks, I'm Bill Southworth. This here's my cousin or my nephew. And he's just moved out here. And they'd be the nicest people in the world. They'd say, I see you folks have made an offer on this car and sure would help him out if you bought it. They'd be so nice. And they'd say now, and he'd go through everything on the thing. He'd say, oh, you got 4 kids? That must be wonderful having 4 kids. I've never been able to have that many. Oh, and you live in this house, and God, your house payment's $300 a month. You must be real proud to have something like that. That's really nice. And what about you, ma'am? What do you do? And he just, like, it was unbelievable.
Just make him feel real good about themselves.
I mean, I think but you would, I'll tell you that what really happened over that with me, but they would be feeling good about everything. And then you would take their offer, the closer would take their offer, and he would go back upstairs. He would say, now, I'm going to try to get this deal on for you. I think it's pretty impossible, because he would show them what the down payment should be, how much the payment should be, how you shouldn't really get this much off, but we're going to try to do you a special favor, because I need my nephew that's living with me and his kids to go find a place of their own, and I got to help him make some money. And so they then would come back, and the manager upstairs would have written all over it with a felt pen, can't do, cross through the down payment. You would write down the down payment they wanted to put in the payments. He had crossed through it and put, need $1,000 down, not $300. Need these payments, not these payments, and cross it and put a big X for them to sign. Then the closer would go back down and say, folks, I really tried, but here's what it's really going to take to get this car. And they'd go back and forth like that. Writing on the paper, just wearing their fucking ass out, just to the point of unbelief. Little kids getting tired. They can't. They finally go, we got to go and get up, and then they realize they don't have their keys. Because an appraiser would take their keys and drive their car around the block and appraise it. Then they've lost control of their keys. They've lost control of their watch. They can't go anywhere. So they'd say, well, before you go, folks, before you go, let me go back upstairs. I'm going to get a guy who's been here long enough to see if he can help you. They might end up talking to 6 closers, before they left. They would have their wives rubbing the back of their necks because they were so worn out and beat up. People weren't used to that kind of pressure in those days.
No.
And it was almost like really unkind what we were doing.
Yeah.
And I got to where I couldn't watch it anymore. So then they decided to make me a closer. So I become one of them. And I was really good at it, but I was really nice. But finally I had a sheriff and his wife come in one night. I was the closer. I had 8 salesmen under me that would bring me the deals for me to close. And I was making 10 grand a month and 64 and 5.
That's a lot.
Sometimes 12.
That's a lot.
Yes. I was the strongest closer there. I was the youngest. I was working with closers that wouldn't take me as a salesman because I was so young, they didn't think I could do it. Then when I became a closer, I was so young, salesmen wouldn't work for me at first because they thought I was too young to be a closer. I didn't know enough. But I knew more about cars than all of them put together already. Mm-hmm. And I was a pretty good talker too. So, but finally the sheriff came in one night, bought a wagon. His wife was really pretty, cute, sweet. She had one little kid already and was pregnant with another one. And they bought this wagon, and I knew it was over their head, but they just worked them to death. And I remember 2 months later her coming back in and him following her and said, we got to give the car back. We can't afford it. It was a repo. That happened quite often, actually. And that day I went up to Bob Sykes and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't watch shit like that happen. And so he wanted me to stay because that's good. But I went and started the Parts Mart. It was a speed shop in Campbell at the corner of Camden Avenue and what's now Santa Moss, right past Lark Avenue, by Camden Avenue. Yeah. And it was a really neat speed shop, a really neat place. It was called the Parts Mart. And we had
You started that?
Yeah.
You started it up in
from it was a brand new commercial building. So I left Bob Sykes. I had bought a house already with Susan we had lived first on Camino del Sol by Lark Avenue. Then we had just bought the house right off of Winchester. Right? Neat house. Neat house. And Christy was still a baby. She was the brand new baby. And the streets Buena Vista.
Christy was a baby. So it
was me and Susan. We were
how
married.
How old were my mom and Greg at the time?
They weren't. Your mom wasn't born.
You said Christy was still a baby.
I'm sorry. I meant your mom was still a baby. Right. And she would cry at night. And
how old were you at the time? How old were you?
64. I was 22.
22.
So really? Kelly was born in 66, 5 or 6. Your mom. Yeah. And we had that house on Buena Vista, which was really a nice house. I didn't own that house, I don't think. We bought a house right after on Camino del Sol, I guess. But the house we lived in. But anyway, Christy was. Why do I keep saying Christy? Kelly was brand new.
You and Shushu were married at this point.
Yeah, we had gotten married, and I had the Parts Mart. Yeah, I had the Parts Mart. And we didn't have a lot of money. She worked as a nurse. She made good money. And I'd run Kelly up to the summit at night trying to get her to go to sleep. And she'd be in the car seat thing or whatever it was. I don't even know if we had car seats then. And then finally she'd go to sleep. That house was really neat, by the way. It was a cute house. And so then we moved. I don't know where we moved then. Anyway, had a 64 Chrysler 300K freaky car. She always had a real neat car. And I had that Parts Mart, and it was a really cool place. We had all sorts of neat cars and stuff. And then I don't know why I went back in the car business. Oh, I sold it. Charles called me and said, I'm here in the damn Pontiac dealership. I just bought a Bonneville for his wife, Linda. And he says, the owner here said, if you think there's so much money in this place, why don't you just buy it? He said, so I did. But he was in the trucking business. He was real rich. And he says, so you got to move back here and run it. I'm going to just give you half the place. And so your grandmother and me, we got in the car and left. And we moved to Oklahoma. And Greg was in diapers. But they didn't have disposable diapers in those days. And we drove that 53 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, Mrs. Girardelli's car, Girardelli chocolate, all the way to Oklahoma without air. Kept having flat tires. And she'd have to go to the laundromat every night and wash diapers. Susan would.
Gosh.
And we went off script there for a moment, but then we can do more whenever you want. But that's just the beginning, and I loved Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Your grandmother, I don't know how much you want to know. This is
a good place to stop for
but
the
I'm
call,
telling
for the
you
call.
this.
I want to hear about Oklahoma.
I am open for you hearing anything about this life you want to hear.
There
are other people that won't talk about it.
This has been incredible. I think this is a great
You
place.
seem very tired.
I just am tired. I don't know what it is.
You're always tired.
But this is it's frustrating.
Well, it's a great place to stop because it's now 3:14.
Yeah, and we've been going for that's about an hour.
Is that all? Good. Well, I'm telling you, I mean, it's a fairly interesting life. It gets even. We get to Ferrari finally, but I think, I don't mean that should be in a book, that should be on a tape or anything. But I'm thinking you being interested in the thing, I don't know how we got to where we were. Our life. You know what I mean? From day one.
Yeah.
And there's way more to that too. But I only can do so many things because it gets boring. It gets tiresome to you. And
it doesn't get boring or anything.
It gets tiresome then. But
tiresome.
Hearing the same thing over and over. But
I don't get bored.
This was. I've done stuff that. I could spend days just telling you about life in Georgia. I mean, God, that stuff we. But I don't know. I hope I didn't ruin anybody's life. It's like there's been a lot of hurt in this family, and most of it was because I really never knew how to act right. I don't mean I was mean or jumped around and beat people or stuff, but I had never had a mother. And I think that really did affect me, even though I don't know how to know that. But I never had a mother. I never had a mother that put me to bed and loved me and held me and all that. And I think that does affect a person. Charlotte never once. One night I thought, before Dad married her, we're riding around in the 36 Buick. And we're going out to eat or something. And her kids were with their father, because she had divorced her father. So they had weekends they would leave. Harvard and Madeline would go spend time with her dad. And I'm with Charlotte. Jan's with Charlotte, but Jan's young. And we're riding around going out to eat. We're in that 36 Buick, and I'm standing up in the back seat, standing up on the floor and holding onto that robe bar they used to have in them. And I asked her, I said, because I was probably 42, 5, 6. And I asked her, I said, can I call you Mom? Because I knew they were going to get married. They'd told us that. Mm-hmm. She said, no, never. And that was how I got told that. Because I had never had somebody to call Mom. You know what I mean? Yeah. Help me with this one. Because what's happened to me, what's happened to me is they cut this big thing out of my, it still hurts.
Yeah.
But I still remember that this day. It's like I can visualize it as I say it. But I asked her,